Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. Hey everyone, and welcome to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by Ella Massal, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I'm your host, Dina Sargeant. Let's get started.
Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. Now, a divorce may end your marriage to your partner, but your co-parenting relationship continues to affect your children for better or for worse. Today, we're going to be looking into what this transition may entail and how to adjust parenting styles to fit the new relationship and the new family dynamics that may occur. Joining me on the show today is a licensed psychologist who has worked with children and families for over 3 decades, with her practice focusing on families going through a divorce or collaborative divorce, as she likes to say. Her knowledge will definitely be invaluable to our conversation today. Dr. Ann Buscho, thank you so much for joining me, Ann.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Now, as a licensed psychologist, what exactly is your role in sort of assisting parents with co-parenting after a divorce?
After the divorce. So parents, once they divorce, have to have a plan as to how they're going to parent their children because they'll be living separately. So a co-parenting plan is the most essential piece. And my role with divorcing parents is to help them construct a parenting plan and together and an agreement that's documented that they can keep. The plan would include things like their schedule, but it would also include things like how education, religious training, holidays, all of those things will be handled, as well as dating, new relationships, and when to introduce children to a new relationship. Many of the issues that one could predict will arise, I try to cover in that parenting plan. And the things that that can't predict, not everything is predictable. I always include a strategy for parents to approach those issues as they come up.
Mm-hmm. That seems like such an important role. It's so similar to like a agreement contract as to how things are supposed to sort of go after a situation. And is it a task that both parents sort of have to agree on throughout the process?
Well, it won't work if both parents don't agree. And so I really encourage parents not to agree to something if they can't keep the agreement. Usually by the time people get divorced, they've lost all trust in each other. And keeping agreements is the start of rebuilding that trust. And that would be my hope. So a documented agreement that they both buy into and one that is kept is going to help rebuild a cooperative parenting relationship.
Mm-hmm. So you've also written a book on co-parenting called The Parent's Guide to Bird Nesting. Could you tell us a little bit about the idea behind the term bird nesting?
Sure. It's interesting because bird nesting, or nesting as I call it, has been around since the early 90s. I got divorced in the early 90s, and my ex-husband and I nested or bird nested for 15 months. What that means is that the children stay in the home and the parents take turns being on duty with the children. So there is a schedule, but the children's lives are less disrupted. They sleep on the same pillow every night, and their routines stay pretty much the same. It buys some time for everyone to adjust to this new way of being. So some people will nest for a short time, even just a month or two, and that's fine. And some people will nest for years. It really depends on the family and how they work it out. I believe it's better for children. If nothing else, it gives kind of a more gentle startup to the divorce for the children. And it gives the parents time to kind of recover emotionally and figure out what they're going to do with their marriage. Are they going to try to reconcile? Are they going to go ahead and divorce? And since at that point, most people don't know their financial situation, it's a way to kind of hold off on purchasing a second home, for example, until the divorce is done and people understand where they stand financially.
Mm-hmm. It's such a better transition as well financially, if you think about it, than sort of just one parent has to leave and go completely on their own and figure out exactly what they want to do, and also still have room for their two kids to come and stay with them as they go transition between both houses. It sounds like a bit more of a, okay, this is the transition part of the transition rather than just jumping into them finding out who they are completely alone.
Right. It's a child-centered approach. So my hope is that parents will always put their children first. And most parents will say that they want to do that, but from a lot of parents, their emotions really get in the way. And so nesting successfully means that parents need to put their children ahead of their own emotions. And that's not always so easy, but it's definitely possible. During COVID, a lot of families nested kind of involuntarily because they were locked down together. And it worked. I worked with quite a few families like that. So it's better for the kids. And it's when the kids start going back and forth between two homes, if that's ultimately what they do, the parents will have more empathy for what that's like because they will have done it while nesting. And so if their child forgets their homework or their soccer clothes at the other parent's house, the parents are going to be a little more sympathetic to that.
Mm-hmm. No, I definitely see its purpose and I definitely see how it's beneficial. Now, thank you so much for that introduction and for sharing a little bit about what your role is as a licensed psychologist. Now, before we get deeper into it, I'd love to get to know some of your interests and maybe some recommendations you have as well. And hopefully we get to warm up quickly before we ask the even deeper questions.
Sure.
Now, to start off with, do you have a favorite book that you could share with us?
Well, I'll say that I love historical fiction. And I also will read anything by Louise Penny or Jodi Picoult. I like mysteries, and I like mysteries that have a psychological bent to them. So Leaving Time is a book by Jodi Picoult that I loved, but she tackles interesting, somewhat controversial topics in all of her books. I think almost all of her books have been banned in Florida because she takes on controversial topics. So just for that reason, you should read it. You should read her books.
No, it sounds really good. Is there a book that she's written that was with her daughter as well?
That she wrote with her daughter?
Yes, I think it was called, it's Jodi Picoult, isn't it? Yes.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
there's a book that she wrote alongside her daughter called Between the Lines that ultimately got me interested in reading to begin with. That was the book that I always seem to find myself turning to whenever I'm in a mindset of not wanting to read. That's the book that sort of gets me out of it. And I have not ever lost that copy of the book that I have because it's so, it's such an interesting read, an interesting take as to how people see story characters.
Yeah. And so I'll look for that because Leaving Time is also a story about a mother and daughter. And that's one reason why I really enjoyed it. It's got a totally crazy twist at the end that is, it's fantastic. It's a good book. I don't want to give anything away.
No, do not give anything away. I really love her writing, so I will definitely go and have to search that book as well.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to movies, do you have a movie that you have recently enjoyed?
Since COVID, I don't think I've been in a movie theater, and I almost never watch TV. However, there was a documentary recently on the making of We Are the World. I think it was called The Greatest Night in Pop. And that was the song that they created to fundraise for the famine in Africa back in the 80s. And every musician that was alive at that time contributed to that, and it was so beautifully done. Everyone from Cyndi Lauper to, Paul Simon and Harry Belafonte. And I mean, it's just an incredible group of musicians. And how it was pulled together, it was really amazing. So that's the most recent one I've seen.
That sounds like an amazing documentary with like such a beautiful meaning behind it, with the role that every person sort of played dealing with the situation and trying to promote the way that the reality of a lot of the world that's sort of facing.
Yeah.
No,
It's a good cause and really a wonderful song. And they talk about how they wrote that song. Stevie Wonder was one of the people that wrote it, but just how they pulled that together was just amazing.
Yeah, no, definitely sounds like it. I'm going to go and search that up after this. I think that is such an incredible. I think I have heard the song. I haven't really heard the meaning behind the song, so now I definitely have to go and search what the song is.
Yeah.
Now, are you listening to any podcasts at the moment that you could share with us?
Yes. I think Anderson Cooper's podcast, it's called All There Is, has been really powerful for me, particularly right now. I lost my father a few months ago, and Anderson Cooper talks about grief, and he interviews different people about grief and grieving. And so it just resonated for me. He interviews people like Joe Biden, who lost his first wife and child in a car accident. And Anderson Cooper's mother was Gloria Vanderbilt, who's a fashion icon, so she died, and it really was because of losing her. But he also lost a brother by suicide, and his father died when he was only 10 years old. So he has all this built up grief, and he comes across as so human and so compassionate and with such deep feelings. And he even gets tearful almost every time and every episode. So I really recommend that. It's called All There Is.
All There Is. No, that sounds like an amazing. It's such a deep listen as well. It's to sort of get us really in touch with a lot of different people's lives and to people's realities. And I think, especially in this day and age, we definitely lose that touch, that sensitivity to others, which that podcast definitely sounds like a great example as to how we can sort of regain that understanding back as a society.
And grief is something we all experience. It's such a universal experience. And yet it's so hard for people to talk about it. And it's hard for people to talk to people who are grieving, and people grieve in such different ways. And I just think this podcast puts it all out there so that it's okay to talk about it. And it gives people permission to feel the grief in any way that they do. And it gives people permission to talk to grieving friends. And I think it's a very valuable podcast. And I think this is the second season that's happening now.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'm making a note of everything that you're mentioning, and I'm definitely going to look that up now, because it's always amazing hearing different people's opinions on this show. And I ask these questions as a routine, but the answers I get are so different each time. So I'm always learning so much about how other people are sort of interpreting podcasts or books or films. And no, it's always amazing to sort of hear everyone else's opinions on these.
Wow.
And now when it comes to a role model, either in your professional or personal life, are there people or maybe a single person that you find yourself looking up to?
Well, I had a wonderful stepmother when I was in my teens and 20s. And she's always been a role model for me of a mother, right? And She was a listener. She listened, as if you were the only person in the world. She would be so focused on you. And as a psychologist, as a therapist, that's an important skill, to really pay attention to people and be attuned to them. She was also really patient and smart and generous and kind. And yeah, she taught me a lot.
Oh, that's such a great role model to have and to list out to this day as sort of someone that really stands out to you within 7 billion people in the world. And that's the person. I think that's such a great reference to have for a lot of the work that you do now.
Yeah.
No, that's incredible. And to have someone that sits down and actually listens is very rare in this day and age. So
that's right. And also, I work with blended families, and I have a blended family. So the fact that she was part of my blended family was also taught me a lot.
Yeah, no, that sounds such a great example. Now, either throughout your time studying and throughout all of the academics that you've sort of gone through, is there a course that has really inspired a lot of what you do to this day?
Well, of course, to be a licensed psychologist, it requires a doctorate, right? So there are a lot of courses and a lot of research and a lot of writing and a lot of statistics. But the thing that I think affected me the most was not part of my program. It was a multi-year training, and it was called something like Self-Reflection for Conflict Professionals. And because I work in the area of divorce, I'm a conflict professional. And self-reflection, it's being able to know what's going on in yourself as you sit with people who are suffering. So it was taught by a Zen Buddhist and an attorney mediator who taught as a pair. And we met for weekends and once a year for a week-long kind of intensive. And I learned a lot from that, just about meditation and about deep breathing and staying calm and helping other people calm themselves.
Mm-hmm. I think that is just as important of a course to mention, because I think especially as a psychologist, you forget that you're also a person sort of hearing a lot of different situations, which is also can definitely impact you. So that course definitely seems like it's such a great way to your own well-being as well. So to sort of compartmentalize what you're going through and what clients are going through, which is two completely different situations at some point.
Yeah, it's self-care.
Yes, it's just as important. Yes. And I think it's something that we definitely forget within ourselves as well. So it's good that course is there to sort of even remind you to this day that sort of inspires a lot of what you do.
Yeah.
Now, I know that a lot of people have a very different definition as to what parenting is. And some people hear it as either the word parent, which is the noun of being a parent, or parenting. In your either professional or even your personal life as well, do you have a definition of parenting that you could share with us?
Well, legally it's one thing, but the way, divorce, the courts will define parenting in a legalistic way. I see it as our role as parents is to guide, raise our kids with a sense of safety and security and love, and safety in the world, confidence. I think we have to provide a stable environment for them, which becomes more difficult after divorce. Mm-hmm. And we want our kids to grow up to be healthy adults. So we need to pay attention to how they're doing all the time, how they're responding to their own development as well as changes in the family. So I guess that's how I would define it. There's also something that I can't name all that easily, but I think our job is to help our children develop a sense of morality, a sense of right and wrong, making good judgments. And, as parents, our role is to try to help kids learn how to make good judgments and good decisions.
Mhm. And with that definition, what do you think that a lot of expectant parents sort of need to be aware of when they're going through that transition of being a parent?
I've never met a parent who was prepared for what happens when you have a child. Um, I think parents are amazed at how much they love this creature almost immediately. As they become parents, they realize they have a capacity for love that they never knew they had. And so that's sometimes almost overwhelming. And, and I've heard, expectant parents say, well, I'll go back to work after 6 weeks. And most parents are not, they don't realize that 6 weeks, they don't want to be away from their child. And it's one of the struggles of parenthood is balancing things like work and parenthood. So I think that's one. I think they don't necessarily expect all the challenges and worries that will come up over time with their kids, and when kids are born, they have their own little personalities and the parents can't control that. And so I think parents sometimes think that they can control how their child turns out. And it's a shock to find out that some kids come into the world with a certain kind of temperament, and other kids arrive with a totally different kind of temperament. And you have to be nimble as a parent, and you have to focus on the child that's right there in front of you. And I think these are skills that parents acquire on the job.
Yes. I mean, I can definitely see an example of me and my sister, the contrast in our the way that we sort of even just handle situations is completely different. And that's definitely a life lesson for my parents, sort of trying to figure out how best to sort of discipline my sister and discipline me in a way that sort of doesn't make one or the other seem a little bit less insufficient, which I think
Right.
is just as important.
Yeah. That's right.
Now, we're talking a lot about co-parenting today, and that's the main topic of our conversation. There's a whole idea of the co-parent transition that sort of takes place. What do we mean exactly by that transition, and what does that sort of entail?
Well, when you're married, you have roles as partners, and you know what your role is, and who takes out the garbage and who washes the dishes, and we know the stereotypical, mom does most of the parenting. Both parents might be breadwinners, but somehow, even so, moms are doing more of the parenting than dads. And as parents decide to separate, their roles change dramatically, because when they're on duty, they're a full-time parent, right? When they're off duty, they have to let go. And this is not something you do in a married partnership, right? When you're with someone. So that's a huge adjustment. And sometimes I have to talk to parents about cutting their co-parents some slack and giving them some time to learn how to brush their little girl's hair, or how to pack a school lunch, or, the kinds of things maybe they didn't have to do. And that's one of those things we talk about in the agreements that we draft is, what kind of chores are parents going to expect? And will it be the same at mom's house or dad's house, and so on? So it's a big adjustment to seeing their kids not 100% of the time. In California, and I think in a lot of places, the default is that parents share parenting time roughly 50-50. So that means about half of the time that that you're not with your children. And this can be heartbreaking for parents who are used to being with them, tucking them in every night. So these are big adjustments, big changes. I also think the other piece of the early transition is how you communicate with the children and how you explain what's happening in an age-appropriate way.
Mhm. So a lot of it is you're sort of starting out as a unit and then you turn into individual parents.
That's right.
Okay.
Right. And married parents have different parenting styles often, but they can work together how they're going to support each other. But divorced parents that have different parenting styles present a whole new set of issues.
So when you listed out some of the challenges a little bit earlier as to the difficulties that each individual parent sort of faces not having their child half the time within the week, or maybe once a week they don't have their children with them at all, how can they individually sort of address these challenges in a way that sort of allows them to feel a bit more comfortable?
Okay. So I think, first of all, you have to think about in the early stages of separation and divorce that it is a life crisis for most people. This is an incredibly difficult time for most people. It's, the breakup of a marriage can feel like a death. So people are maybe grieving, maybe they're furious, maybe they're extremely anxious, maybe they're really depressed. Maybe they're elated because they want out. Maybe they're relieved, but at the same time, they're going to be sad about the changes and so on. So they're living with these intense emotions right at the beginning. And so how do they take care of themselves during that initial period? And I think they'd have to take care of themselves by making sure they're eating and sleeping and not falling back on old bad behaviors like drinking. I think they need to have friends that they can talk to, maybe even a therapist or a counselor. I think they have to be very careful not to talk to their kids about their struggles. I think their kids don't need to know that. And they have to find a way to show up for their children despite these intense emotions that they're carrying as parents. So in their off-duty time, when they're not parenting, that's when they need to really focus on self-care and staying healthy and making sure they have good people to talk to and that they're getting whatever support they need. I hope that answers your question.
And yeah, I really think you did answer that question in terms of how a lot of the emotion sort of kicks in when dealing with that loss and dealing with the intensity that I think a lot of parents sort of feel about not having their kids, and maybe the worrisome that the other parent isn't doing to the quality that they are used to doing, or that the now co-parent has also become the main parent for once a week, for a whole week, or for half the week out of half the time each week. And there's a lot of changes that sort of take place, which is something that I don't think we really talk about when we talk about divorce. We always look into how the child feels emotionally or how the parent feels about taking care of the child full time, or the parent that used to be on the back burner a little bit is sort of taking charge each week. But we don't really talk about the parent who's no longer the main parent, who's no longer the one running around after each of the kids, making sure they're doing everything, making sure everyone is okay. They're now having to really sit back and deal with the loss of a marriage, the loss of their children, in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that is one of the challenges. And I think I said earlier something about cutting their co-parent some slack, because I've worked with a lot of fathers in particular who were really focused on their careers. And then when the divorce happened, they realized they didn't want to be away from their children so much. And they were willing to cut back on their careers in order to focus more on spending real quality time with their children and getting themselves up to speed with, having the parent-teacher conferences and helping their kids with homework and, doing the things that maybe the other parent generally did.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's important for parents to allow each other to catch up when their roles have changed so much. Kids can adapt if their parents do. If their parents are struggling, it's going to be harder for kids to adapt. Parents don't have to parent exactly the same way. Kids can adapt to different parenting styles, just like in intact marriages. Kids know which parent is strict and which parent is more lenient, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't change with divorce. I think the risks are parents who start to use the kids as spies or messengers or confidants, right? Or, doing loyalty tests for the kids, putting them in loyalty binds. I think those are the ones that are the most worrisome to me.
Okay. And when we're talking about co-parenting, I think one of the main biggest effects, like we said, are the children that's sort of affected either positively or negatively. What steps can parents take to minimize the impact on their child's well-being and making sure that the child is okay?
I just love that you asked that question because it's the most important question, I think. What hurts children the most? This is lots of research has shown that what hurts kids the most is conflict between the parents. And parents, even if the parents don't have their conflict in front of their children, the kids can feel when their parents are in conflict. They can feel by the way the parent hugs them. They can feel the tension. They can see the look in their face and their eyes when the other parent, comes up in conversation. So the best thing parents can do is stop the conflict in whatever way it takes. And there are a lot of ways that can stop the conflict. But whatever it takes, if they stop the conflict, the kids are going to do okay.
Mm-hmm. And there are essentially two routes that can be taken that are most commonly taken when it comes to the way that parenting can sort of affect the child. And I think one of the biggest ones is how honest should the parents be with their child and sort of helping them understand the divorce or helping them understand the reason behind the divorce, or is that something that shouldn't even be spoken about?
That's a good question because it brings in so many different facets. First of all, it depends on the age of the children, right? So you're going to talk to a 5-year-old differently than to a 17-year-old, right?
Yeah.
A lot of divorces happen because of infidelity. That's maybe the most common cause. And it's certainly one of the most common causes. And kids do not need to know about that. It's really hard for the parent who was betrayed says, I don't want to lie to my children. I want to be honest. I didn't want this divorce. He's the one who wants it because he has a new girlfriend, whatever. That kids do not need to know that. It puts them into a loyalty trap. Kids will very often, because they're black and white anyway, black and white thinkers, they'll almost always try to find which parent is the victim, which parent is to blame, right? They want to look, and it's never that easy. It's never that simple. So when I talk to parents, what I do is I coach them to talk to the kids together and use the we word in whatever way they can. We haven't been happy together. We've tried working on our relationship and it hasn't worked out. We haven't been able to make it better. We think we'll be happier if we separate. So using that we word is really important. If one parent blames the other, it sets the child up for a conflict in loyalty between his parents. And they'll either be cast into the role of having to take care of the parent that they feel is a victim, or to turn against the parent who they feel was to blame. Kids are going to find out this stuff later anyway when they're adults and they can handle it. So I think let's protect the kids while they're kids and not let them go on being kids and not worry about their parents and who was right and who was wrong and who was hurt and who was the perpetrator. And I don't think we need to put kids in that position. Mm-hmm. So I would say to parents, they're going to talk when they're in their 20s and 30s, they're going to figure it out if you haven't told them by then. But they don't need to know now when they're kids. Just encourage kids to go on being kids.
Yeah, that's a big thing, because I think there's so many ways and so many scenarios that you sort of see and that I've sort of seen about one parent sort of saying something. It can be even as a joke. It can even be something as simple as this is what your dad does. This is what dad does at home and stuff like that. And you sort of see that a lot on like TV shows where it comes like the role of both of the parents and what they say about each other behind each other's back. And I think the strange thing is that you forget that they used to care about that person is another thing as well, that used to be that their marriage ended, but they still used to care about that person, like for the fact that, and that's something that I never really understood when I used to see that, is the fact that, but you were married to them, you used to care about them. Why would you suddenly spin around and suddenly want the worst for them, or want to be saying the worst about them? And when my parents split up, I was actually very, very glad that they have remained closer friends than they have done as partners. And the way that me and my sister, we're now both adult children sort of living with my dad, but the way that they both still communicate is that they still call each other regularly. They still are seen as being really good friends with each other and being there to support each other when things get a little too difficult. For example, if one of the parents one of them is overworked, they'll always send messages as to how they can go and relax, make sure you go for a walk, make sure you eat and stuff like that. So they've dealt with it in a way that I feel is not commonly seen.
You're right.
Not commonly spoken about, which is crazy, because when my parents split up, I was sort of expecting, okay, they're not going to talk to each other at all. I'm going to have to pick a side between both of them. And when I found out that they're both still communicating and they're both still very much in touch with each other, and probably better the way that they are now than they have been in their entire 20 years of being married to each other, it's amazing to see how much that one view of their relationship now can really change my view on how a relationship should be.
Yeah, and it must be a relief for you that you don't have to take sides and you don't have to get involved in their conflicts, because adult kids sometimes get pulled into the arguments between parents, and become referees, or, they're messengering back and forth, or they're trying to mediate. And, that's not, even for an adult child, that's just sort of not fair for them.
Yes, no, I was very glad to sort of see that. And I think one of the things that I am very particular about, and I think I speak about this constantly on the show, is the parenting styles that both parents have. And I believe, like we said before, that both parents are going to have two completely different ways to parent a child. But when it comes to big situations that sort of need both parents to understand, that sort of need two aspects on the view, how can co-parents maintain that consistency in their parenting style across the household where both children aren't sort of like, oh, okay, this parent's going to let me go and do whatever I want. I can't tell this parent though. So like, how do you sort of maintain that consistency when it comes to those big situations?
Well, sometimes you can predict some of those things in the parenting plan. For example, when your child might be allowed to have a cell phone, or when your child might be allowed to drive a car, because that's going to affect both parents, right? So you want parents to agree on that. If they can agree in advance about that, that's great. If an issue comes up, like one parent thinks it's okay for the child to smoke pot at home and the other parent doesn't, then you have a conflict, right? And what I usually have in the parenting plans that I work with parents on, and I would encourage every parent to do this, is to have a section about what happens when problems arise like that. They would have already pre-decided who they would talk to. Either they would talk to another family member or friend who could mediate, or they would go to a mediator, or they would go to a co-parenting counselor, but they would have pre-agreed to work these things out together when they came up. Now, if they don't agree to do that, at some point, you have to let go. I mean, if one parent says, I don't mind if my kid smokes pot at home, and I don't really see a problem with it, and it's legal, and I don't want to talk about it. And the other parent is, it's not healthy, it's not good, he can't go to school stoned, and this is real, this comes up. If at that point, you could blow it up, you could amplify it, you could go to court, you could make it a really big issue, or you could just let it go. And I don't know what the right answer is, in those situations. For every family, it's going to be different. If it was my family, I would have a very hard time letting it go. But I also wouldn't want my child to be keeping secrets. I won't tell mom that I'm smoking pot with dad, So it's better to have it out in the open. That way, when the child's with the other parent, they can talk about it, maybe help that child think through their decision to do that, do it in a way that helps the child develop that judgment that I spoke about earlier, and maybe offer other kinds of support to the child.
Okay.
The worst case scenario is to go to court and have the judge rule, that in my mind, it's necessary for some families because they're not able to resolve conflicts on their own. But I would see going to court as a very last resort.
Co-parenting is definitely an ongoing process. And like we've mentioned before, there's always going to be the needs of a child that is changing as they're growing up. How can parents sort of go ahead and reassess and maybe readjust their co-parenting strategy that meets the changing needs of their children?
It's a good question, and it is something that should be addressed in the parenting plan because, change is inevitable. The kids are going to change, and circumstances will change. Other things will come up. One parent might remarry. There might be new siblings. There might be changes of jobs for the parents, maybe a move. Their changes are inevitable. So in the parenting plans that I work on with parents, I ask them to commit to meet 3 times a year for a review of the parenting plan. And it's very specific about when the meeting is going to happen. We put the dates in. And one is meant to plan for the fall and the holidays and looking at what is going to happen over the holidays, Christmas. Is anything going to be different than what their parenting plan says? Maybe the child's been invited out of state to a friend. Then I asked them to do that again later in what is our winter in January or so, to discuss again what the plans are going to be over that semester and the school breaks during that time. And then later, perhaps in May, to talk about what's going to happen in the summer months, which is that your winter?
Yes.
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 So that's the time. That's the time when parents need to make decisions about camps and, other bigger travel plans and so on. And so when they sit down 3 times a year to look at planning, that's for both of them. At the same time, they could look at perhaps truing up some expenses if they've been sharing some expenses. They could also look at unexpected expenses, like if the child needs therapy or a tutor or something like that. So it's a time to reassess the whole plan. But the planning schedule, planning for the future is what makes that critical to do it at least 2 to 3 times a year. Most of the people I work with do it 3 times a year.
Okay. That seems like a very reasonable reassessment to sort of look at what's going to be fitting, especially as, like you said, the child could get invited to so many different things and the set plans may not really exist that may not fit exactly what they need. So that sounds like such a great way of both parents sort of getting on the same page about
Right.
certain aspects and can stop all the fights that sort of happen right when the situation starts.
Exactly.
Now, how can parents really recognize that their co-parenting efforts are successful? And what are the greatest ways that parents know that they're doing the right thing with their child? Is it shown in their child or can it be shown within their parenting efforts themselves?
That's a great question because usually people ask, like, how can they tell when their kids aren't doing well or, something like that. When they can tell, you can tell when kids are doing well when they're thriving, they're happy, they're sleeping well, they're not regressing in any way, they're not more clingy, they're not wetting the bed, they're happy to see friends, they're not withdrawing, they're doing well enough at school. Basically, what you hope is once kids adjust to a divorce, that they're functioning, the way they are behaving and feeling is pretty much how it was or better before the parents decided to divorce. Right?
Yeah.
I also think parents who are parenting well feel good about their parenting. Like they can tell that their child is doing well and that makes them feel good. So there's affection, there's humor, there's some closeness, there's open communication. If that's happening, parents can feel, I think, take credit and feel good about the way their parenting is going.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you a quick example of that. My oldest daughter, when she was in high school, she's in her 40s now, so this is a long time ago, used to go to raves with her friends. And raves in the 90s were kind of scary, a lot of drugs. But she would come and she would say, I want to go to this rave. I'm going to be the sober driver. Don't worry about it. And then she'd come back. And no matter what time it was, the rule was she had to come in and wake me up, and so I would know she was okay. And she would climb in bed with me and tell me all about it, right? And to me, that was a sign that she was doing well because she didn't feel like she had to hide anything. She was having a good time. She was safe. She was driving safe. She was sober. I could tell, when she would talk to me. So I felt pretty good about that.
That's such a great example. It's such a great testament to the parenting style and to the co-parenting as well. I think that's such a great example. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Of course.
Now, this leads us really perfectly well into the practice and habit part of the show. Now, this is some practices that you would recommend to a lot of our listeners here today in order to build a supportive household, whether it's in a co-parenting household or a bird nesting household that sort of takes place. Now, what is a practice that you would recommend to maintain a positive household, either in a blended family or a separated situation?
There's so much to say about blended families that I guess we don't really have time for now, but sometime, I hope that you're able to have that conversation. Um, I think there are different ways. I think for some families, rituals are really helpful. So, for example, um, well, I can think of several examples. One, it depends on the child. So, one of my kids, when he would come to me after the divorce, had to have time alone. He had to make that transition alone. And so I respected that, right? So I just would give him his snack and he would disappear for about 20 minutes and then he was ready to join. And I think that was important. I think if I tried to force him into some sort of, I'm so happy to see you, I haven't seen you in 4 days and, I need a hug and, that would not have been good for him. So knowing the child in front of you again, he needed that break. Another child just needed to sit close and cuddle and talk about her week, right? So that would be something that I would do. I know when the kids left, we always had a big group hug. That was one of our rituals. I think spending focused one-on-one time with each child is really important, especially since you don't have the kids full time anymore. Most of the time there's shared parenting. So I think having that one-on-one time, maybe it's reading a bedtime story to a child and cuddling or, something like that, but making sure each child gets individual attention. I also think it's really important not to talk about what goes on at the other house. So that's where kids can become spies, right? So parents who say, oh, is daddy dating? Or, what did you do with daddy yesterday? I think that's unfair to the children. If they want to volunteer it, that's great. But I think it introduces that kind of stress and loyalty sort of stress for kids. So I would avoid that. We used to have at dinner, we used to have gratitudes. So we'd go around the table and each person would talk about one thing they were grateful for that day. And that would set the tone for the dinner. And that was nice. We did walks, played with the dog. I think introducing some set of ritual or routine to it makes it easier for kids to make that transition into the home. I want to say one thing about that transition, though. When one parent drops kids off at the other parent's home, if that's what happens, I really caution parents about having any kind of conversation at the front door. That's the moment to just say, hey, thanks, have a great day, but not get into, I thought you said you were going to take little Jimmy to soccer on Saturday and, that's not the place to start a conflict. That transition time is a very vulnerable time for children when they're going from one parent to the other. So parents have to be especially careful and aware of not getting into some kind of tense conversation with their ex at the front door.
Okay. No, that is a great practice. I can only imagine how that would be for the children sort of going through okay, I'm going to spend time with dad and then talking a lot to dad for like 4 days. And now I'm spending 3 days here with mom, having to talk to her, and the dynamic of the kids between each parent is going to be different in itself. So the way that they might talk a whole lot more to dad will be different to the way that they talk to mom, depending on how the parenting is. So that transition of having to go from a laid back parenting dynamic to a bit more of a strict and routine parenting dynamic must be a big change for them to sort of transition in their mind. Yeah.
It's as simple as at mom's house, we have snack and then homework. And at dad's house, we have homework and then snack. It's these little things that make it hard for kids to make the transition.
Mm-hmm. And this ties really well in with the other question that I really wanted to know, and some other habit that I'd really like to know. What are some habits that each co-parent should do if they are worried about leaving their child in the other parent's care?
I guess it depends what the worry is. I mean, if they just think the other parent isn't a wonderful parent, that's one thing. If they think the other parent is either drinking or abusive in some way, that's a different concern, very different
Mhm.
concern. I think one habit is that if parents can either text or email an update to the other parent about the children just before the transition, that's that's helpful so that it feels to the kids a little more seamless. When they arrive at dad's house, he already knows that, little Jimmy had a stomach ache at school or a nightmare last night or, was coming down with a cold or whatever. If there can be a little update about the kids at the transition time, that will help. If they're really worried about what's going on with the other parent, I think they need to look into that and see what is the worry. If the other parent just has a different parenting style, that's the lax parent, that's the one who lets their kids stay up late watching TV or, something like that. Doesn't give the child baths. I mean, I've heard this kind of thing where, he just, it's so often it's the dads just don't give the kids baths. Um, if hopefully there's a way they can talk about it. And if they can't talk about it, then they have that fallback of talk to a friend, a family member, a mediator, or a co-parenting counselor. If there's a more serious concern, like the other parent is drinking or you think they have a drinking or drug problem, or he's doing other terribly, inappropriate things, that's a time to consult with somebody about how to handle it, to get some professional help.
Okay.
If it's a safety issue, basically it comes down to safety for the children.
Okay. So there's a depending on what the worry is, I think it's sort of best to identify what the worry is first, whether it's their own sort of thought about, okay, the parent is not going to do the exact same thing that I'm doing, or whether it could be something more than that.
Yeah,
And to see whether it's their own sort of prejudice or whether it's actually something to be worried for.
exactly. Is the child safe, even if it's a different parenting style, or is this a safety question that needs to be
Okay.
attended to?
Okay. Well, thank you so much for answering that. And this section leaves us into the open mic. Now, this gives you a chance to talk about anything that you are passionate about, that you want to discuss today, that we may have not had the ability to discuss, or it can be anything that you want to promote with us today. So, in the last minute or so, I'd love to give you the floor and share what's on your mind with us today.
Well, of course, I'd like to tell people about my book, The Parent's Guide to Bird Nesting. However, I also really think I want to talk about collaborative divorce, which is a way of divorcing that is in Australia. We've got collaboratively trained professionals in Australia who are dedicated to keeping divorcing parents out of court. And it's a model where each parent has their own attorney, you have representation. There may be a neutral parenting coach and a neutral financial person who helps collect the financial information, and sometimes a neutral child specialist. But it's a way to help the family as a unit end up in a better place at the end of the divorce than where they started, and it keeps them out of court. I'm a huge supporter of collaborative divorce. I think it's much better for families. It's been around since the mid-90s. And if people Google it, they'll find collaboratively trained professionals in their area.
Oh, that's perfect. Well, thank you so much, Anne, for joining me on the show today. Now, if our listeners want to find out a little bit more about you, either your work or even your book as well. Is there a place that I can send them to find out a little bit more?
Sure. Well, of course, my website, which is drannbuscho.com, and it's drannbuscho.com. There's a lot of information about nesting and other information on the book, on the website about divorce. I am kind of moving into retirement, so I'm not taking new patients now, but I still write a blog for psychologytoday.com, and it's called A Better Divorce. And you can find me there as well. I think if you search A Better Divorce, I have about 125 articles on there now and 2.5 million readers. And so there's a lot of really good information for people thinking about divorce, going through divorce, or already divorced, thinking about co-parenting.
Well, thank you so much, Anne. I'll definitely have those down in the link in the description box below for everyone to access them so easily. I definitely cannot appreciate you joining me on the show today to talk about this and sharing a lot about your thoughts as to how parents can really coexist and really go through that co-parenting where both sides feel appreciated and respected. And yeah, thank you so much for also sharing your work with us today. It was amazing having you on.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed our conversation.
And I hope you guys learned as much as I did when it comes to co-parenting and going through that transition. I'll see you all in the next episode.
You've been listening to Raising Parents, the Parenting Science Insights podcast, produced by the Parenting Science Labs, a division of LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. More episodes are available from 10 life management perspectives and can be found by searching LMSL on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and other podcasting apps available on your devices. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it so that we can grow and bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website at pa.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Dina Sargeant. Thanks for tuning in.